Madam Chair, this is Teresa. We're ready to begin when you are.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Good morning. I'd like to call the December 14th, 2020 special meeting of the LMO committee to order. Teresa, are we in compliance with FOIA?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Great, thank you. Could you please call roll?
Certainly. Mr. Scanlon?
Here.
Mr. Theodore?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Ms. McGowan?
Here. Does staff have any changes to the agenda?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Okay, that's Mike. And is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Teresa, roll, please.
Mr. Scanlon?
Present.
For the agenda?
Oh, yes, I'm okay with the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Theodore?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Ms. McGowan?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next item, approval of minutes. We have two sets of minutes. One's the regular meeting of September 16th, 2020, and the special meeting of September 23rd, 2020. I'm going to take them together. May I have a motion to approve both sets of minutes?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Teresa, can you please call roll?
Sure. Mr. Scanlon?
Yes, I approve the minutes.
Mr. Theodore?
Approved.
Mr. Campbell?
Approve.
Ms. McGowan?
Approve. All right, item 6, citizen comments. Teresa, have we had citizen comments concerning this meeting?
No, ma'am, we have not. And just so you all know, citizens were able to submit public comments concerning agenda items electronically via the portal. There were no comments to provide to the committee. Citizens could also sign up to give public comment during the meeting by phone, and there were no requests to give public comment by phone.
Okay, thank you. Moving along to new business, which is review of changes to the LMO related to the adoption of the new flood maps. Would staff like to make a presentation?
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
We're
can hear
going
you.
to get the presentation started. Thank you, Madam Chairman, for joining me. Thank you all for joining me today to discuss some changes that we would like to propose to the LMO based on the flood insurance rate map changes. If you'll give us just a second to get the presentation started.
And this is Sherry Mendrick speaking?
Yes, ma'am. I'm Sherry Mendrick. I'm the floodplain administrator for the town of Hilton Head Island. And once again, I'll be discussing the changes to the LMO as it relates to the flood map changes with you today. Just bear with us.
Madam Chair, can we get the volume turned up a little bit there or get it closer to the microphone?
Yes. Hang on just a sec. You got that? Yes. Okay. Can you hear me all right?
Barely.
Barely? Can you hear me okay now? Is that
Okay.
better?
A little bit.
Okay, I'll talk as loudly as I can. Luckily, I'm pretty good at that. So the key points that I would like to kind of throw out to you guys as we start the discussion is the deadline for Town Council to adopt the new flood insurance rate maps is March 23rd of 2021. We are meeting here today because we need to revise the LMO to keep maximum building heights the same. If we don't approve the LMO changes by March 23rd of 2021, maximum building heights will be reduced by several feet. So to start with today, I want to review the basics of how flood insurance rate maps work. We'll talk about the maps themselves, base flood elevation, and the firm update, and how the maps will change. Then we'll talk about the municipal code changes and LMO changes we need to make sure the firm update does not negatively impact the town. So what are flood insurance rate maps? The key point to take from this slide is they are flood insurance rate maps. insurance rates is what these maps are used to calculate. They are used as a minimum standard for regulations that for building elevations in the town. So any changes that we propose here today will not negatively impact flood insurance rates. The maps are a guide for building standards. And these are the minimum standards that are in place for those flood insurance, for the lowest floor elevations. So FEMA publishes the flood insurance rate maps, and our current map was adopted in 1986. So here's a screenshot of our current flood insurance rate maps. They can't see a pointer.
Yes.
Okay. So these, if you can see the pointer on the screen, the dark blue areas are the high risk zones, and the red areas are the low and moderate risk zones. So these high risk zones are the areas that require flood insurance, and those are the areas that are currently regulated within the town. So what is a base flood elevation? Well, when you look at the flood insurance rate map that I just showed you, you see this first zone right here, which encompasses most of the town. It's 75% currently of our land area. Is flood zone A7, and that's just A7 is a designation used for flood insurance rating. And then the base flood elevation is 14 feet. Again, the important thing to note here is the base flood elevation is 14. 14 is what we use for regulating today. So to put this into perspective, we'll start with sea level, which you've probably heard referred to as mean sea level. And then we have the ground level, which is obviously above mean sea level. And then there's the base flood elevation, or BFE for short. Remember that 14 from the flood insurance rate maps? The 14 is the base flood elevation, which is a measurement above mean sea level. So BFE 14 means the base flood elevation is 14 feet above mean sea level and 7 feet above the ground level in this particular diagram. The base flood elevation is the expected height that the water will rise during a once-in-a-century flood, or a 1% annual chance flood. It does not mean that it's going to occur every 100 years. It means that it has a 1% chance of occurring in any 1 year. So every 100 years, the flood water will be 14, or is expected to be at some point in time, 14 feet above mean sea level, which is 7 feet above the ground level. So let's build a house today. So this house is in flood zone A714. Once again, the base flood elevation is shown here as the elevation on where it falls on the house. And you can see the lowest, which is 7 feet above the ground level. And you can see that the top of the lowest floor, which is our regulatory where we measure to right now for lowest floor elevations, is 15 feet above mean sea level. Our current building code requires the base flood plus 1. So for this particular home, their lowest floor has to be 15 feet above mean sea level, which is then 8 feet above the ground. So you can see that in a 1% annual chance flood, once every 100 years, the top of the first floor would be anticipated to be 1 foot above the floodwater. Well, why are we here? We need to take action because FEMA is updating the flood insurance rate maps. And the town, once again, has to adopt the flood insurance rate maps by March 23rd of 2021. So what's the problem here? The base flood elevations on the new flood insurance rate maps are significantly lower and historically lower from other flood insurance rate maps for our community. You ask yourself, with things like climate change and sea level rise, why wouldn't the base flood elevations be higher? Well, FEMA publishes the maps, and the data used for the maps was actually generated in 2013. Yeah, it's better than 1986, but the new maps use better technology. and better based data, but they were developed before Hurricanes Matthew and Hurricanes Irma impacted our town. This is so very important because during these two storms, we lost a lot of our primary frontal dune system. This dune system slows the storm surge, which reduces flooding, and without those dunes in place, storm surges can be expected to be higher. So this is showing that the new flood maps are showing that our flood risk is lower because it was not modeled using the higher flood risk that was generated from Matthew and Irma. So in effect of that, when they go back and remodel the town, these map revisions are supposed to take 5 to 7 years and not 34 years. We anticipate that the base flood elevations will go back to the similar historic highs as they are today. So let's take a look from our first illustration that I showed you before. Let's take a look at how this could affect building in our area. So on this slide, you have a base flood, you have our same scenario. We have the sea level, we have our ground elevation 7 feet above sea level, and the BFE base flood elevation of 14 feet. Well, in this particular example, the base flood elevation is being lowered to 7 feet, which is equivalent to the ground elevation. So remember our first house? Our first house shows that the home was safely built higher than the floodplain, or higher than that base flood elevation. Whereas if we don't take into account some of these changes, the top of the floor will only need to be 1 foot above ground in this particular case. So that would result, I'm going to go back, so that would result in significant flood losses to homes within our community. So what are we going to do about it? As a result of the firm update, the town does have to revise the municipal code. As a result of that, we are proposing that the top of the first floor to be built at the same height that it is now, not at the minimum of 7 feet. For example, with residential development, the top of the first floor would either need to be 14 feet above mean sea level or the new base flood elevation plus 1 foot, whichever is higher. I do have stars next to these. I'll discuss that in just a moment. So for almost all the properties within the town, the 14 feet above mean sea level will be the higher measurement. Remember that today, 14 feet is the most common base flood elevation on the island. Requiring the top of the first floor to be at 14 feet above mean sea level keeps residential structures out of that 1% annual chance flood. We did asterisk those because the 14 feet is a little bit complicated. There is a datum change that's a survey reference marker, but the 14 feet today on the new maps will essentially be the 15 feet on the old maps. There's a purple asterisk next to the new BFE plus 1 because we have had a suggestion and a recommendation from upper management that we consider going to BFE plus 3 feet for residential construction because this is very common for most coastal communities. For commercial construction, we are proposing that the top of the floor will either need to be 11 feet above mean sea level or the new base flood elevation plus 1 foot, whichever is higher. For almost all properties affected by the map change, 11 feet would be the higher of the two. And we could consider changing that plus 1 to a higher level. But at this time, staff thinks that this is a safe building height for commercial properties. So I've gone over all the municipal code changes, so I'm sure you're wondering why you're here today. Well, changes to the municipal code do affect the land management ordinance, which is what we're here today to discuss. The reason why we're here is because the LMO measures maximum building heights from the base flood elevation. So per the LMO, the building heights are measured starting at the base flood elevation and not the ground level. For example, if a property is currently with a zone with a base flood elevation of 14 feet and in a zoning district with a maximum 35-foot height, the maximum building height is measured starting at 14 feet above mean sea level, which is 7 feet above the ground. Here you can see the house is 35 feet tall as measured from the base flood elevation, and this house currently complies with the LMO requirements for maximum building height. From the ground, this house is 42 feet tall. From the BFE, the house is 35 feet tall. Again, this house complies with the LMO's maximum building height. So, these flood maps propose to lower the BFEs, which would, in effect, if we do not consider a change to the land management ordinance, will lower maximum building heights. So when the new BFEs go into effect, they will be reduced significantly in most areas. For example, on the property that we just looked at, the BFE will be reduced from 14 feet down to 7 feet. Now the building height measurement would start at 7 feet instead of 14, so the maximum building height is effectively reduced by 7 feet. The part of the roof above the 35-foot BFE would now be considered non-conforming. Any new property on this, or any new structure on this property would have to be 7 feet shorter than what's allowed today, and that owner would lose 7 feet of building height, which the key thing to take away on this slide is that they would lose the ability to park under the home. Staff is proposing to change how building heights are measured by using sea level instead of base flood elevation. No, I apologize. LMO would measure building heights at 14 feet above sea level, which is the height of the BFE. This is the same height with a different name. So instead of measuring it from base flood elevation, it would be measured from 14 feet above mean sea level. This will maintain the maximum building heights as they are today. Base flood elevations may change in the future, but sea level will not change. Again, the result of the proposed LMO amendments will be that the current maximum building heights will be the same after March 23rd, 2021 as they are today. Returning to those key points that I pointed out in the first slide, we do need to take action quickly because Town Council must approve the new flood insurance rate maps by March 23rd. We do need to revise the LMO to keep maximum building heights the same. If we don't approve the LMO changes by March 23rd, the maximum building heights will drop by several feet. I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. And at this time, I can take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Sherry. Board members, run through you. Mr. Scanlon, do you have any questions?
No, I think it was very well explained, and even I understand it.
Thank you. Mr. Theodore?
Thank you. Sherry, how's the county handling the changes?
I have had 2 separate conference calls with the other municipalities in Beaufort County, and there's kind of mixed feelings. I'm not just going to, Todd, if you don't mind, I'm not just going to say Beaufort County because I do have information from the other floodplain managers. I will touch on the city of Beaufort first, and Beaufort is proposing something very similar to what we're doing today. They are proposing to keep their lowest floor measured from 13 feet because that's their typical base flood elevation. Now there's kind of, with the changing environment at the county, I think right now the county is just looking at getting the maps adopted. But on top of that effort, the county does have a sea level rise task force, which has met several times. Ann Syram with community development is part of that task force, and she's actually allowed me or invited me to speak as far as floodplain management goes with this task force. And one of the first recommendations that came out of the task force was in relationship to these flood insurance rate maps and suggested that building heights should be, or the lowest floor elevation should be kept consistent with what they are today. So I think it's going to kind of be it's my understanding from Mr. Merchant with Beaufort County that it might be a dual effort, that the flood insurance rate maps might get adopted as, with the 1 foot freeboard, but then their effort would be through the Sea Level Rise Task Force to address building heights. So they are considering something very similar. I don't know what their time frame for adoption is, but I do know that the city of Beaufort has already taken something very similar forward to their town council.
Okay. And then out of curiosity, does FEMA, when they're calculating storm surge, are they calculating it with the dunes in place?
Yes, they did.
Okay.
Yes, the modeling was actually completed for the Atlantic Ocean, which is us, the town of Hilton Head Island, in 2013. So it did not, we have recovered some of our dunes. They are not fully recovered, but yes, the modeling does take into account an extensive dual primary frontal dune system.
Okay. And then what zones don't fall into this criteria? Is it just the X, or is it the X and shaded?
So with this proposal, we are proposing to expand the lowest floor requirement through all zones. I'm going to drop some statistics. So right now, we currently have 75% of our property in the high risk zone and 25% in the low risk zone, unregulated zone. Currently, if the ground elevation is above 14 feet, they are not in that high risk zone. So this proposal takes the building height across the board. Basically, we have some areas that are historically low, have repeated flood losses that are going into the zone X and shaded X. For example, we have 2 large repetitive loss areas in North Forest Beach and Point Comfort. A home that's had repeated flood losses could get a grant from FEMA to elevate their home, but their home might be in zone shaded X, which means they could demo a home and build back at a lower elevation if we don't do something about this. We have a lot of our beachfront property that is also going into zone shaded X. Now, to flip that, to explain how it's going to work again on the new maps, is that those statistics are flip-flopping. So we will have only 25% in the high-risk zone, and then we'll have 75% at the low-risk zone. Again, the ground elevation at 14 feet doesn't change. So those homes that are in a historically low area, such as North Forest Beach or Point Comfort, where the ground elevations are 7 feet, we are considering kind of stretching the requirement across the board to keep everything consistent with the way things are today.
So I'm not just trying to understand the volume of this. Does that mean our current standard with the existing FEMA maps, when the new ones come out with this type of criteria, are you increasing the areas that are impacting buildings?
When you look statistically at the base flood elevations as opposed to the ground elevations, the regulation will apply across the town, but the homes that would be affected will still remain in that 75%. So yes, it will be a town-wide 14 foot, but when you actually pull out the elevation of 14 foot, the same amount of area is going to have to raise their lower floor.
But does that mean there could be new homes that have nonconformities now with this regulation?
They will be limited.
But do you know what the extent would be?
No, sir.
Because I'm just trying to understand that are we staying the same or are we increasing? It seems like FEMA is lowering the criteria. Are we staying the same, or are we increasing where the town is in
We will be
terms of?
staying the same. With this proposal, we will be staying the same with building elevations of where they are today.
Okay. And you and I've had conversations in the past, so this doesn't help the fact that gatehouses and recreational restrooms under 300 square feet will ultimately just have to flood-proof their structures, correct?
We are working on something through the flood damage controls ordinance to have a special category of accessory structures. But that is language that we are working out. For those of you who don't know, back in the process started in 2015, but the town periodically undergoes a audit by FEMA, which is called a community assistance visit, or a CAV. And FEMA identified something in our ordinance that had pretty much always been there that exempted pool houses and guardhouses from having to be elevated based on their nature. Well, FEMA required that exemption be removed because it's not consistent with the National Flood Insurance Program. So knowing that has caused some restricted developments for areas, for instance, parks that need restrooms. We don't want to have all kinds, continue to have all kinds of handicap accessibilities, because we got to pull those restrooms up off the ground. But we are looking for a special, we haven't quite coined the term yet, Todd, but we are looking for a special consideration for a low value, and FEMA requires us to define low cost for any sort of accessory, but some sort of special accessory structure that can meet that minimum standard of base flood elevation +1. We cannot go lower than that, period. So that is something that we do have to require, but with the lower base flood elevations, we're looking at, having to pull those accessory restrooms, potentially guardhouses. The problem with guardhouses is it's conditioned space. But we're looking at a special consideration for that, but that was something that FEMA required us to remove from our ordinance.
Okay. My recommendation would be, it would be helpful if this goes to Planning Commission, to have a colored map showing the new 14 zone versus what's existing that you shared with us in your presentation. Is that possible?
Yes, sir.
I think that would be helpful just to see the extent of that area, because that would be good for everybody to kind of have an idea on that. And I would assume we probably have LiDAR, topo, or something accurate enough to kind of give a good rendition of what that would be.
Yes, most definitely.
Okay, that would be my recommendation, is to show that that area. And I don't know if it's now, is there a distinction? I'm trying to understand the 11-foot versus the 14-foot. Is in all instances, do commercial buildings also have to be up above the 14 or the 11?
So for commercial buildings, we wanted to make a special consideration to be consistent with the current land management ordinance to continue to encourage redevelopment of those properties. And when town staff went through these discussions, we identified that getting residents back in their home was the #1 important thing for our community. We have to get people back in their homes to be able to rebuild our businesses. So we have a lot of businesses that are there's a struggle because they don't meet the current lowest floor requirement of that base flood +1. And we identified that 11 feet, which as if surveyed today would be 12 feet, but that 11 feet was a reasonable compromise to continue to be consistent with the encouragement of redevelopment through the LMO and not put extensive burden on trying to bring these buildings up just 1 foot. So there was special consideration with getting residents back into their homes as the #1 priority after a storm.
And then in your illustrations, you were showing sort of base flood elevation +1. If it's a wood structure, is that +1 measured to the underside of the structure?
The measurement is based on the zone that it is in. So if it is a zone A, which will now be zone AE, it's measured to the top of the bottom floor. So the top of the floor system.
Okay.
If it's in a zone V, as in Victor, or VE, then it's measured to the what's called the bottom of the lowest horizontal member. But wood framing is not allowed in a V zone. So it would only apply to those V zones, and there's very little V zone left on the property. So the most restrictive zone in most cases is going to be that AE zone, so it's to the top of the bottom floor.
Okay. All right. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Todd.
you. Mr. Candle, do you have any questions, comments?
No questions or comments.
Okay, thank you.
One additional, Madam Chair.
Go right ahead, Mr. Scanlon.
Has the sea level rise task force noticed any sea rise in our low country area over the last several years? What can you tell us about that? Have we noticed sea level rise?
So with the Sea Level Rise Task Force, they've used, and this is kind of across the eastern seaboard, it was based on data that was developed by NOAA using a tidal gauging station in Charleston and in Fort Pulaski, that over the past 100 years, sea level has actually risen between those two tidal gauges 1 foot. Doesn't seem like a lot right now, but when you look at stuff like climate change and you think about the stuff that you see, everything starts out on a linear rise. So, when you look at it statistically, it started out as a kind of a linear incremental increase. Well, now we have hit the part where the experts believe that is going to be more of an exponential increase. So I can't speak over the past couple years, but I can ask Anne, and she would be at the Planning Commission, that she could, possibly provide some information regarding the findings of the task force. I know there's a ton of data out there from NOAA and both the Sea Grants Consortium that I'm sure Anne would be able to provide additional information.
That 1 foot rise, is that over what period of time?
The current 1 foot rise that is being looked at right now is over 100 years. So it doesn't seem like much. But like I said, that was just a linear increase. We've only been monitoring those tidal stations for about that long, and they being the experts, believe that we are now hitting kind of an exponential curve rather than a linear curve on that rise.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. One question I have, and first of all, I think you mentioned it, but I just wanted to confirm that this is not going to affect people's flood insurance rates. That what's being proposed will be drawn on the numbers and the mapping that firm is putting out.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. The maps are what's used for flood insurance rating. The town can't, or any municipality does not have any control over flood insurance rates. Those are set by the Flood Insurance Administration, and the maps themselves are what, when you go to buy a house, they pull the flood zone from the map, and that's it. The only thing that any regulations that we would do are considered what's called higher regulatory standards, which FEMA does allow municipalities to do to keep resilient building in their area. So this does not have any effect. It will only improve people's flood insurance rating.
Okay. And my other question, given the impact that losing the dunes has, are there any actions being taken to limit the properties along the oceanfront that have been breaking, I think, illegally through the dunes?
Not that I am aware of. I know that the town, to flip that, after Hurricane Matthew, well, actually it was started after Irma, had the sand fencing project to try to rebuild those dunes. But as far as private property and restricting dune impacts, there is some sections of the LMO that has certain allowances. That's kind of a little bit out of my wheelhouse. I don't know if, I think maybe Terry, I don't mean to call her out, might be online, that she might be able, or she might be able to provide some additional information on that. But that's a little bit outside of me.
Yeah, it just seems like, especially since the hurricanes and people had, when nobody is looking, there have been a lot of private beach accesses that were constructed through the dunes. I'm talking about in Sea Pines in particular. And I'm sure that when there's a hurricane and there is a surge, that's where the water's going to go.
Yes, I do agree. But as far as the LMO goes, that's probably something better addressed by, not me.
I agree.
I apologize.
Okay. So I think that that is there a consensus among the committee to forward these amendments to the full planning commission with the additional illustration that Mr. Theodore mentioned?
I would move that.
I'll second.
A second, okay. Teresa, can you call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Scanlon,
Yes, I would approve.
Mr. Theodore,
Approved.
Mr. Campbell,
Approve.
Ms. McGowan.
Approve.
Motion passes unanimously, 4-0.
Thank you. Now, the last item on our agenda is the proposed 2021 meeting schedule. If the board members have reviewed that, I understand, I'm asked staff, I assume that these are scheduled to be at Town Hall.
This is Teresa. Currently, I just received information that January meetings will be virtual still.
Okay.
But we're going to take it month by month. The plan is to have come back to town hall at some point, but just monitoring the numbers, and we're going to continue on with virtual for the time being.
All right. So the proposed schedule is in your packet. Are there any comments or questions from the board members? Okay. Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the schedule?
So moved.
And second, Mr. Scanlon?
Yes.
Teresa, can you call roll?
Sure. Mr. Scanlon,
Yes, I approve.
Mr. Theodore,
Approved.
Mr. Campbell,
Approve.
Ms. McGowan.
Approve.
Thank you. Motion passes unanimously.
All right. With no other business before the committee, first I'd like to say happy holidays to all my fellow members. I know we're meeting again on Wednesday, but not in our little group here. And if there's no other business, then the meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.